They always tell you to dress for the job you want, but no corporate management book warns you about what happens when a piece of tarnished jewelry brings down a billion-dollar tech empire in under 5 minutes. I never wore that ugly, gray alloy ring for fashion or to show off. I wore it as a primed detonator, patiently waiting for arrogant fools to step on the switch. Hello and welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero budget to keep operations running. If you enjoyed today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking staff to cover their living expenses and continue creating these revenge tales for you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link in the description or pinned comment below. My name is Madeline Richardson. At 32 years of age, I had perfected the art of corporate invisibility. I worked as a mid-level data security engineer at Aero Vanguard Solutions, a sprawling energy tech conglomerate headquartered in a towering glass monolith in downtown Seattle. In a place like this, being unseen was a calculated survival tactic. The executives floated through the frosted glass hallways like modern royalty, wearing bespoke suits and projecting an aura of untouchable wealth, while people like me kept the servers running and the firewalls intact. I attended mandatory meetings, nodded at the appropriate intervals, and blended seamlessly into the gray ergonomic chairs. Today was different. The air in the executive boardroom on the 50th floor was suffocatingly tense, heavy with the scent of expensive dark roast coffee and nervous sweat. We were preparing for a historic merger, the kind of multi-billion-dollar deal that would cement Aero Vanguard as a global monopoly. At the head of the long mahogany table sat Marcus Sterling, the vice president and the architect of this impending empire. He was reviewing the presentation deck with the aggressive scrutiny of a predator, his sharp eyes darting across the projected financial charts. 15 minutes into the briefing, the heavy glass door swung open. The rhythmic, sharp clicking of red-soled stiletto heels echoed against the polished marble floor. It was Chloe Sterling. At just 25 years old, Marcus's daughter carried herself with the exhausting entitlement of someone who had never heard the word no. She held a meaningless title in the communications department, a role invented entirely to justify her presence and her exorbitant salary. She strolled into the room clutching a custom-ordered iced matcha latte, her designer coat draped casually over her shoulders. She did not apologize for interrupting. She simply expected the room to pause and admire her arrival. Chloe took a seat directly across from me, dropping her leather handbag onto the table with a loud thud. She looked around the room, her gaze sweeping over the department heads with thinly veiled boredom. She needed a way to assert dominance, a quick victory to remind everyone that she was the heir apparent. Her eyes landed on my hands, which were resting quietly on my laptop keyboard. More specifically, her eyes locked onto my right hand. "I have to ask, Madeline," Chloe said, her voice piercing through the low murmur of the room. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her perfectly manicured hands. "What exactly is that thing on your finger? Did you lose a bet? Or is post-industrial grunge making a comeback?" The boardroom fell into a deathly silence. Dozens of eyes snapped toward me. "I mean, seriously," Chloe continued, her lips curling into a mocking smirk. "We are hosting one of the most important tech billionaires in the world next week, and you are sitting here wearing what looks like a piece of scrap metal picked from an industrial dump. It is completely unprofessional." She was talking about my ring. It was a thick, dull gray band with an asymmetrical, rigid structure that looked entirely out of place next to the gleaming platinum and diamonds worn by the executives around us. It lacked any polish, any gem, any aesthetic grace. I felt the collective breath of the room hold steady. At the head of the table, Marcus Sterling let out a low, amused chuckle, silently endorsing his daughter's cruelty. The other directors quickly mirrored his reaction, offering polite, sycophantic smiles to humor the princess. They waited for me to flush red with embarrassment, to hide my hand under the table, or to stammer out a pathetic apology. Instead, I kept my hands exactly where they were, I looked calmly into Chloe's eyes and used my thumb to slowly twist the gray ring around my index finger. The metal felt cold and heavy against my skin. I did not say a single word. I offered no defense, no anger, and no apology. I just let her words hang in the sterile air of the boardroom. Chloe took my silence as a sign of pathetic, cowardly submission. A triumphant gleam lit up her eyes. Having successfully humiliated a subordinate, she felt emboldened to take complete control of the meeting. Since we clearly need to ensure our presentation is flawless and aesthetically up to par, Chloe announced, flipping her blonde hair over her shoulder, I will be taking over as the lead presenter for the VIP visit next week. I will handle the front-facing communications, and the engineering team can just feed me the technical jargon through an earpiece. We cannot risk any embarrassing optics. Marcus beamed with paternal pride and immediately approved the change. The rest of the room nodded in frantic agreement. Chloe leaned back in her chair, radiating smug satisfaction, completely unaware of the reality of the situation. As I sat there, gently turning the rough metal band on my finger, I almost felt sorry for her. No one in that room, not Chloe, not the terrified directors, and certainly not Marcus Sterling, had the slightest clue about the truth. That dull alloy ring was not a cheap piece of jewelry. It was not a fashion statement. It was a unique, offline hardware encryption key, forged directly from the first server core of a top-secret system. It was the only physical access token in existence. And as Chloe basked in her petty victory, she had no idea that she had just insulted the very mechanism that held the power to reduce her father's entire stolen empire to dust. People in the industry often wondered why a woman with my security clearance and technical scores remained anchored to a suffocating mid-level cubicle. The answer was terrifyingly simple. You do not walk away from a crime scene until you have gathered every single piece of evidence. Aero Vanguard Solutions was not a legitimate business. It was a glittering, glass-paneled vault holding the greatest intellectual theft of the decade, and the victim of that theft was me. 8 years ago, during my final year of university, I developed a self-learning data routing algorithm. It was designed to optimize renewable energy grids, cutting power waste by more than 40%. It was elegant, flawless, and revolutionary. Marcus Sterling was an aggressive venture capitalist serving as a guest lecturer on campus. He noticed my work. He offered me an exclusive fellowship, promising mentorship and unlimited resources. I was young, exhausted, and trusting. I handed him the keys to the kingdom. Within 3 months, Marcus buried my name under a mountain of predatory non-disclosure agreements, funneled the intellectual property through obscure offshore shell companies, and filed the master patents under his own newly formed corporation. He threatened to bury me in endless litigation if I ever spoke up. He built a tech empire worth billions of dollars using my brain, while I was left with nothing but student debt and cold, hard clarity. But Marcus was a businessman, not a true engineer. He stole the house, but he did not realize I kept the master key. Before he physically seized the original laboratory servers, I initiated a deep system purge. I extracted the absolute raw primal source code, the digital DNA that birthed the entire Aero Vanguard operating system. I transferred that highly encrypted microdrive into a custom mold and forged it into a thick band of titanium alloy. That was the ugly gray ring sitting on my right index finger. It held the unalterable cryptographic signatures proving my original authorship. It was the Genesis code. I wore the destruction of Marcus Sterling on my hand every single day, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment was approaching fast, but first, I had to survive Chloe. Over the next 3 weeks, Chloe Sterling aggressively escalated her campaign to break my spirit. With the monumental merger event looming, she weaponized her new title to humiliate me daily. She relegated me to tasks meant for an entry-level intern, desperate to project dominance before the big day. Madeline, these executive summaries need to be printed on the heavy ivory cardstock, Chloe would command, tossing a thick stack of folders onto my keyboard. And go down to the lobby cafe. I need an iced flat white, oat milk, exactly 2 pumps of vanilla, Do not mess it up this time. I would nod politely, offer a subservient smile, and take the elevator down. To the rest of the office, I was a tragic figure, a brilliant mind reduced to fetching expensive coffee for a spoiled heiress. But Chloe's arrogance was her greatest blind spot. She treated me like a piece of furniture, which meant she stopped paying attention to what I was actually doing. Every demeaning chore was an operational opportunity. When Chloe ordered me to deliver her dry cleaning to the executive suite on the 50th floor, I used the isolation to slip a microscopic physical tap onto the mainframe fiber optic cables hidden behind the air vents. When I was forced to crawl under the massive boardroom table to connect Chloe's presentation monitors, I wired a rogue offline access node directly into the primary security hardware. I was meticulously weaving a secondary shadow network through the physical skeleton of the building. I worked in total silence, bypassing firewalls not with remote keystrokes, but with physical hardware bridges. I built a detonator wire stretching from the core servers straight to my desk. The final confirmation arrived on a quiet Thursday evening. The office was mostly empty. I was sitting at my terminal, supposedly aligning the margins on Chloe's slideshow, when a heavily encrypted channel on my secondary monitor flashed green. A secure message decoded itself line by line. The primary target had taken the bait. Julian Vance was confirmed. Julian Vance was an apex predator in the technology sector. He was a self-made billionaire who specialized in brutal corporate acquisitions. He bought companies, gutted their leadership, and integrated their tech into his global conglomerate. Aero Vanguard desperately needed his capital to legitimize their upcoming public offering, but Vance was famously paranoid. The message confirmed that he refused to rely on generated simulation reports. He demanded a live, physical demonstration of the system architecture before handing over any money. He was arriving in person on Friday morning at exactly 9 o'clock. I deleted the encrypted message and closed the terminal. I looked down at my right hand, feeling the cold weight of the titanium ring. The board was set. The shadow network was live. Marcus Sterling was about to parade his stolen empire in front of the most dangerous buyer on the planet, and he was letting his foolish daughter hold the reins. They thought they had won. They had no idea the floor beneath them had already been completely dismantled. Friday morning arrived with the suffocating weight of a looming execution. The atmosphere inside the Aero Vanguard tower shifted from anxious to purely terrified. At exactly 8:45, the private elevators on the ground floor locked down. Security personnel forcefully cleared the massive marble lobby. 5 minutes later, Julian Vance stepped out onto the 50th floor. He did not walk into the building. He invaded it. The man carried a gravitational pull that instantly sucked the oxygen out of the executive suite. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that likely cost more than the average yearly salary of every engineer on my team. He brought with him the silent, terrifying pressure of an apex predator. Julian Vance was a man who could purchase the entire city skyline just to tear it down for amusement. Every single executive in the boardroom shrank into their chairs. Even Marcus Sterling, a man who usually commanded a room with predatory ease, seemed to fold inward. Marcus practically bowed as he offered his hand, his voice a pathetic, reedy pitch as he welcomed the billionaire. Julian barely touched Marcus's palm. His eyes were cold, calculating, and completely devoid of human warmth. He took his seat at the center of the long mahogany table, placing a heavy gold-plated fountain pen perfectly parallel to his leather portfolio. He did not smile. He did not offer small talk. He simply waited. The meeting began, and Chloe Sterling seized her moment. She stood at the head of the table, her blonde hair flawlessly styled, her white designer suit glowing under the harsh fluorescent lights. She projected the first slide onto the massive glass screen. She flashed a practiced, blinding corporate smile. Then, she started speaking. It was a disaster of magnificent proportions. Chloe began throwing out hollow technical buzzwords she clearly had memorized in front of a mirror just hours before. Our synergistic blockchain routing allows for dynamic paradigm shifts within the quantum data assimilation matrix, Chloe announced, gesturing wildly. None of it meant anything. It was verbal garbage. The senior engineering directors stared down at their notepads, sweating profusely. Marcus maintained a frozen, terrified grin, praying the billionaire would buy the performance. And Julian Vance. Julian did not even look at her. He stared blankly at the polished mahogany wood in front of him. He did not nod. He did not take a single note. He simply let Chloe's voice echo against the frosted glass walls, effectively treating her like irritating background noise. The silence radiating from the billionaire was deafening. Chloe's confident smile began to crack. A faint flush of red crept up her neck. Her voice wavered. She needed a distraction. She desperately needed someone lower on the food chain to absorb the suffocating tension building in the room. Her panicked eyes darted around the space and landed directly on me. I was standing near the back wall, holding a digital tablet, maintaining my perfect, silent invisibility. Chloe's voice cracked like a whip across the quiet room. "Madeline," she snapped, her tone dripping with sudden venomous authority. "Mr. Vance's glass is empty. Pour him some sparkling water. Do try not to spill it on his suit this time." The room held its breath. It was a blatant, highly calculated act of humiliation. I was a senior data security engineer, not a catering assistant. Forcing me to step forward and serve beverages during a multi-billion-dollar acquisition meeting was meant to remind me, and everyone else, exactly where I stood in the dirt. Marcus gave a tiny, approving nod. I did not hesitate. I did not show anger. I placed my tablet softly on the side console. I picked up the heavy crystal pitcher from the serving cart. I walked slowly toward the center of the massive table. The silence was absolute. Every footstep echoed like a hammer strike. I approached the empty space right next to Julian Vance. The billionaire did not even look up. He remained a statue of pure, intimidating indifference. I stepped up to the edge of the polished wood. I lifted the crystal pitcher. I extended my right hand to grasp the stem of his empty glass. As I reached out, my hand passed directly under the concentrated beam of the overhead presentation spotlight. The intense halogen light struck my right index finger. It hit the dull, gray metal of my ring. The light caught the deep, asymmetrical spiral grooves carved into the titanium alloy. The harsh illumination revealed the microscopic geometric patterns etched deep into the raw metal. The unique physical architecture of the raw server core suddenly flared into sharp, undeniable focus. Julian Vance stopped breathing. The transition was instantaneous. 1 second, he was a man bored to the absolute edge of violence. The next second, his entire body went completely rigid. His eyes snapped down to my hand. He stared at the dull gray band. His face instantly drained of all color. The terrifying, untouchable billionaire looked like he had just seen a ghost walk through a solid brick wall. His fingers twitched violently. He lost his grip. The heavy gold-plated fountain pen slipped from his hand. It hit the polished mahogany table with a sharp, echoing crack. The pen rolled off the edge and clattered loudly onto the hardwood floor. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Julian Vance stood up. He did not push his chair back. He slammed it back. The heavy leather chair tipped over and crashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Marcus Sterling jumped out of his seat in pure panic, stammering, desperately trying to ask if something was wrong with the water. Julian completely ignored him. He ignored the terrified board of directors. He ignored Chloe, who was standing frozen at the front of the room with her mouth hanging wide open. Julian stepped around the massive table. He walked directly toward me. The air in the room grew thick, electric, and highly combustible. I stood perfectly still, my hand still resting near the crystal glass. Julian stopped less than 2 feet away from me. He was a tall, incredibly imposing man, but his broad shoulders were visibly trembling. His calculating eyes were wide, filled with an emotion that looked exactly like absolute, unadulterated shock. He slowly raised his gaze from my hand to my face. He stared directly into my eyes. The silence in the executive boardroom was so heavy, it felt like the glass walls were going to shatter under the pressure. When Julian finally spoke, His voice was not the smooth, commanding baritone of a corporate conqueror. It was a hoarse, ragged whisper that carried cleanly across the dead quiet room. "Where?" Julian rasped, his voice trembling with a terrifying intensity. "Where did you get the Genesis key?" I did not flinch. I held Julian Vance's intense, trembling gaze with absolute, chilling calm. The air in the room felt thick enough to choke on. My voice, when it finally broke the suffocating silence, was steady and perfectly measured, lacking any of the forced subservience I had worn for the past several years. "I did not get it from anywhere. Mr. Vance," I said clearly. "I poured the alloy. I carved the grooves. I wrote the architecture. I forged it myself." Julian let out a sharp, ragged exhale. The realization hit him with the physical force of a freight train. The mythical hacker the entire underground tech community had been whispering about, the architect of the impossible energy routing algorithm, was standing right in front of him, wearing a cheap corporate identification badge and holding a water pitcher. He slowly stood up to his full height. The shock in his eyes hardened instantly into absolute, freezing rage. The calculating billionaire realized exactly what kind of trap he had almost walked into. He pivoted away from me, his movements suddenly mechanical and lethal. He locked his predatory stare onto Marcus Sterling. Marcus was still trembling by his overturned chair. He was clutching his leather-bound presentation notes against his chest like a pathetic shield. "The deal is dead," Julian announced. His voice was a flat, emotionless executioner's blade cutting through the sterile room. "We are done here. The $6 billion acquisition is officially terminated as of this exact second." The color drained from Marcus's face so fast, he looked like a corpse propped up in a tailored Italian suit. The other senior board members gasped, a pathetic chorus of whimpers and choked breaths echoing off the frosted glass walls. Marcus stumbled forward, his polished shoes slipping slightly on the slick floor, his hands reaching out in blind, pathetic desperation. "Julian, please, wait. You cannot be serious," Marcus stammered, his voice cracking violently. "What is happening here? This is a massive misunderstanding. It is this girl. She is mentally unstable. She has been acting erratically for months. She is intentionally ruining a private executive session." Marcus turned his frantic, bloodshot eyes toward me, his meticulously crafted professional veneer shattering completely into pieces of pure panic. "Security. Someone call security right now. Get this crazy, delusional woman out of my building before I press charges." Marcus reached out to grab Julian's forearm, a desperate, final attempt to physically anchor his collapsing world. Julian swat the vice president's hand away with such violent, aggressive disgust that Marcus actually stumbled backward and slammed hard into the nearest wall. "Do not ever touch me again," Julian hissed, the sheer venom in his voice paralyzing every single person in the room. He slowly swept his disgusted gaze across the terrified board of directors, looking at them as if they were a disease. "You arrogant, blind, pathetic fools. Do you have any idea what you are actually trying to sell me? You are parading around a hollow, rotting shell. Every single line of code, every routing algorithm, every proprietary system Aero Vanguard claims to own on paper is stolen property." Julian pointed a long, accusatory finger directly at my right hand, still resting calmly by my side. "That piece of metal on her finger is the physical master key. It contains the raw, original source code. It is the undeniable cryptographic proof that your entire corporate empire is built on intellectual theft. And the actual genius you stole it from, the person who actually built the system I wanted to buy, has been pouring your coffee and setting up your projectors." The boardroom descended into absolute, suffocating chaos. Executives began whispering frantically, some grabbing their phones, others staring at Marcus in sheer horror. But Chloe Sterling, completely blinded by her own bloated ego and staggering, bottomless ignorance, refused to understand the catastrophic reality of the situation. She stomped her expensive designer heel violently against the marble floor. Her flawlessly made-up face was twisted into an ugly mask of spoiled, petulant rage. "This is completely ridiculous," Chloe shrieked, her voice shrill and grating, cutting through the panicked murmurs. She is a liar. She is nothing but a low-level data drone trying to sabotage my presentation because she is jealous. Look at her. Look at that thing on her hand. She is probably wearing a piece of garbage she bought at a hardware store just to get attention. She does not know anything about coding. Call the police. I want her arrested for corporate sabotage and property damage right this instant. I want her thrown in jail. I turned slowly to look at Chloe. I listened to her shrill, pathetic demands, her desperate clinging to a power structure that had already ceased to exist. I looked at Marcus, who was hyperventilating against the glass wall. I looked at the panicked directors who realized their stock options were about to evaporate into thin air. And for the first time in 8 long, agonizing years, I smiled. It was not a polite, subservient corporate smile. It was the cold, terrifying, deeply satisfying smile of a predator watching an intricate, inescapable trap finally snap shut around its prey. I did not say a single word to Chloe. I did not need to. I simply reached out and picked up the main digital control tablet resting on the center of the polished mahogany table. I brought my right hand down smoothly. I pressed the flat and heavy face of the titanium ring directly against the glowing glass screen of the tablet. The micro-sensors embedded deep within the alloy instantly synced with the rogue physical bridge I had installed weeks ago under the floorboards. The tablet screen violently flickered. The sleek blue Aero Vanguard corporate logo vanished instantly. The screen flashed a blinding, solid black. A single line of bright green text appeared, verifying the master override command. In a fraction of a millisecond, the heavily encrypted signal shot down the hidden shadow wires I had laid, completely bypassed every single $1 million security firewall, and struck the central server farm in the basement directly in its heart. The instant the encrypted command executed, the physical environment of the 50th floor violently transformed. The pristine, sterile white fluorescent lights embedded in the ceiling flickered and died instantly. For one terrifying heartbeat, the massive executive boardroom was plunged into absolute darkness. Then, the automated emergency network security alarms triggered. A pulsing, aggressive crimson-red glare bathed the room, casting long, demonic shadows against the frosted glass walls. It was the visual manifestation of a digital slaughter. A low synthetic siren began to wail, a sound specifically engineered to induce panic, echoing heavily through the air vents and down the empty corridors. The sleek glass presentation screens that had previously displayed Chloe's meaningless charts glitched wildly. The data streams cascading across the monitors halted. Every single proprietary schematic, every stored gigabyte of client data, every pending operational contract Aero Vanguard held on its servers was instantly swallowed by a black wall of military-grade encryption. Before anyone in the room could comprehend the magnitude of the blackout, the heavy oak double doors at the rear of the boardroom burst open with a violent crash. Half a dozen senior members of the board of directors stormed in. These were the invisible puppet masters, the ancient men who held the true financial reins of the conglomerate, and their faces were twisted in absolute, unadulterated terror. They completely ignored Julian Vance. They ignored Chloe. They lunged directly toward Marcus Sterling like a pack of starving wolves turning on a wounded alpha. The massive digital stock ticker mounted on the far wall, which tracked the internal valuation of the company prior to the upcoming public offering, had forcibly overridden the main presentation display. The numbers were free-falling. The valuation was bleeding out in real time. It dropped 5%, then 12%, then 25% in a matter of seconds. Billions of dollars in projected equity were burning away right in front of their eyes. "Marcus, what in the hell is going on here?" screamed Arthur, the 70-year-old chairman of the board, his face a mottled purple with rage. "The offshore accounts are completely locked down. The clearinghouses just rejected our treasury transfers. My private terminal is telling me the core operating system is gone. Fix this right now." Marcus was completely unhinged. His designer tie was pulled loose, his hair slicked to his forehead with cold sweat. He snatched his mobile phone from the mahogany table, his fingers trembling so violently He could barely unlock the screen. He punched the direct line to the chief technology officer down in the basement server farm. "Reboot the mainframes," Marcus shrieked into the receiver, saliva flying from his lips. "Initiate the hard physical reset. Cut the external lines. Do it right now, you absolute idiot. We are losing everything." The entire room could hear the tinny, terrified voice of the chief technology officer bleeding through the phone speaker. "I cannot do anything. Mr. Sterling, the physical bypasses are dead. The manual overrides are completely blocked. We are locked out of the root directories. There is a rogue encryption wrapping around the primary database, and it is actively hunting our backup drives." "Break it," Marcus roared, slamming his fist onto the polished wood table. "Hack it. Shut the power off if you have to. Take an axe to the servers." "You do not understand." "Sir?" The voice on the phone sobbed. "The encryption is flawless. It is generating new cryptographic walls faster than we can read them. All the administrator monitors just went black." As the technician spoke those terrifying words, every single digital display in the boardroom, from the wall-mounted televisions to the tablets resting on the mahogany table, flashed in perfect unison. The chaotic lines of red error codes vanished entirely. The screens went perfectly, terrifyingly black. A single line of stark, white text materialized in the exact center of every monitor in the room. It did not display an error code. It displayed a chilling statement of absolute ownership. The text read, "Control belongs to Genesis." The sheer panic in the room reached a fever pitch, but it was abruptly pierced by a sharp, hysterical shriek. Everyone turned to look at Chloe Sterling. She was staring down at her rose gold designer smartphone, her eyes wide with a manic, uncomprehending horror. The financial shockwave had not just targeted the corporate infrastructure, it had completely severed the parasitic roots feeding off it. "My cards," Chloe gasped, her voice trembling violently as she stared at the screen. "My platinum accounts. They are declining. Every single transaction is declining." She tapped the glass screen of her phone with frantic, desperate strikes. "My trust fund portal is saying 0. The balance is 0. It says the routing numbers do not even exist anymore." The realization hit the spoiled heiress with the force of a physical blow. The bottomless well of stolen wealth that had funded her entire entitled existence had evaporated in less than 60 seconds. The facade of the untouchable corporate princess shattered completely. She dropped her phone, the expensive device clattering uselessly against the floor. She turned toward her father, her face twisted in pure, unadulterated hatred. "You promised me," Chloe screamed at Marcus, her voice cracking into a pathetic, guttural sob. "You said this was secure. You said nobody could touch our money. You ruined my life. You are a complete failure." Marcus stared at his daughter, completely paralyzed, watching the only person he had built this empire for tear him to shreds in front of the entire board. The senior board members finally realized exactly who was holding the detonator. They tore their eyes away from the pathetic display of the Sterling family and turned their collective, terrified gaze toward me. The transition was sickening. Just 20 minutes ago, I was an invisible ghost, a lowly data drone ordered to fetch sparkling water and print documents. Now, they looked at me as if I were a vengeful deity holding their very lives in my hands. Arthur pushed past the paralyzed Marcus and stumbled toward me. The arrogant billionaire chairman actually dropped to his knees right there on the polished hardwood floor. The other directors quickly crowded behind him, their faces pale, their hands raised in pathetic gestures of surrender. "Madeline," Arthur pleaded, his voice thick with raw desperation. "Please, we had no idea. Marcus lied to all of us. He kept the intellectual property theft completely hidden. You must believe us." I stood perfectly still, watching the most powerful men in the city grovel at my feet. "Listen to me," Arthur continued, sweat pouring down his wrinkled forehead. "We can fix this. Unlock the servers. Release the treasury accounts. If you restore the system right now, we will terminate Marcus immediately. We will strip him of all his assets and have him escorted out of the building. We will make you the chief executive officer of Aero Vanguard today. We will give you a 51% controlling stake in the entire conglomerate. You will be worth billions of dollars. Just please, I am begging you, stop the encryption. They offered me the entire kingdom. They offered me the very empire that had been built on the bones of my own stolen genius. They expected me to take the deal because, in their greed-poisoned minds, everybody had a price. Everybody wanted to sit on the throne. I looked down at Arthur. I looked at the trembling directors. I looked at Chloe weeping uncontrollably on the floor, and Marcus staring blankly into the void. The red emergency lights pulsed rhythmically, casting an apocalyptic glow over their pathetic, ruined faces. "I do not want your sinking ship," I said quietly, my voice slicing effortlessly through the chaotic wailing of the alarms. I turned my back on the kneeling billionaires. I walked calmly over to the side console where I had left my worn black leather briefcase. I popped the brass latches. The sharp metallic click sounded like gunshots in the tense, blood-red room. I reached inside, bypassing my laptop. I pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder tied with a simple string. I walked back to the center of the room and tossed the heavy folder right onto the middle of the mahogany table. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud right next to Julian Vance's discarded fountain pen. "The digital lock is permanent," I announced to the room, "but the physical evidence is right there. That folder contains 10 years of meticulously documented financial fraud, systemic tax evasion, and illegal offshore wire transfers signed by Marcus Sterling and approved by every single member of the senior board. It details every fake patent filing and every bribed auditor." I paused, letting the absolute terror sink deep into their bones. "The digital empire is already dead," I told them. "That folder is to make sure you all go to federal prison for the funeral." The heavy manila folder sat on the mahogany table, like a bomb waiting to detonate. The senior board members stared at it, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of their impending ruin. But Julian Vance did not look at the folder. He looked directly at me. The shock that had previously widened his eyes was completely gone, replaced by the sharp, calculating gleam of a man who only saw the world in binary terms of acquisition and profit. He slowly buttoned his bespoke suit jacket, stepping over the weeping form of Arthur without a second glance. "That was an exceptional performance, Madeline," Julian said, his voice a smooth, dangerous purr. He pulled a pristine, encrypted digital ledger from his inner pocket. "You dismantled a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate in under 5 minutes. I respect that level of ruthless efficiency. But let us talk business. The corporate shell of Aero Vanguard is dead, but your algorithm is very much alive. I came here today ready to spend $6 billion on stolen goods. I am offering you $8 billion right now, clean and direct, for the exclusive ownership of the Genesis key. Transfer the source code to my private server, and I will make you one of the wealthiest women on the planet before you even walk out of those glass doors." The room went completely silent again. Even Marcus stopped hyperventilating for a fraction of a second. $8 billion. It was a sum of money so vast it defied human comprehension. It was enough wealth to buy small countries, to build private armies, to live 1,000 lifetimes in absolute, untouchable luxury. It was the ultimate prize of the corporate world. I looked at Julian Vance. I saw the familiar, predatory hunger in his eyes. It was the exact same hunger I had seen in Marcus Sterling 8 years ago, only wrapped in a more expensive suit. If I took his money, I would simply be handing the weapon over to a different monster. I would become the very thing I had spent a decade trying to destroy. "You are right about one thing, Mr. Vance," I replied quietly, maintaining unbroken eye contact with the billionaire. "The algorithm is alive, but you cannot afford it." Julian frowned, his arrogant composure slipping for a microsecond. "Everybody has a price. Madeline, name yours." "It is not for sale," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute finality. Before Julian could process the rejection, I reached out and picked up the digital tablet one last time. The screen was still locked into the core master directory. I brought up the primary command terminal, with deliberate, measured keystrokes. I bypassed the internal security constraints and connected the raw, unencrypted master file directly to the global public domain grid. I did not hesitate. I hit the execute key. "What did you just do?" Julian demanded, taking a sudden step forward. "I just made it open source," I answered calmly. Every single line of the Genesis algorithm, the entire energy routing architecture, is now broadcasting on public servers across the globe. It is entirely free for any engineer, any university, and any developing nation to download, modify, and use. The reality of my words hit the room with the force of an earthquake. By giving the technology away for free, I had instantly annihilated its commercial value. The exclusive core of Aero Vanguard, the entire foundation of their stolen empire, was instantly reduced to an absolute value of zero. No one would ever buy what the whole world already possessed for free. Julian Vance stared at me, his jaw completely tight. He slowly put his ledger back into his pocket. He did not yell. He simply gave a sharp, curt nod of genuine defeat, turned on his heel, and walked out of the boardroom without looking back. A second later, the heavy oak doors at the rear of the room burst open again. This time, it was not panicked executives. It was a tactical unit of federal agents wearing dark windbreakers with large yellow letters printed on their backs. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had arrived, operating on a highly detailed, anonymous tip I had routed to their cybercrimes division 24 hours prior. They moved with terrifying efficiency. They surrounded Marcus Sterling, forcibly pulling his arms behind his back. The cold, metallic click of steel handcuffs echoed loudly against the frosted glass walls. Marcus did not fight back. He looked completely hollowed out, a broken ghost of a man watching his stolen legacy turn to ashes. As the federal agents dragged Marcus toward the elevators, Chloe Sterling finally broke entirely. She collapsed onto the polished marble floor, her flawless white designer suit collecting the dirt she had previously ignored. She pulled her knees to her chest, desperately clutching her red-soled stiletto heels as if they were life preservers in a sinking ocean. She wept with loud, ragged sobs, mourning the sudden, violent death of her fabricated, wealthy reality. I did not stay to watch them clean up the wreckage. I picked up my empty briefcase and walked out of the boardroom. I took the executive elevator down all 50 floors. The private security guards stepped aside, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. I pushed through the heavy revolving glass doors and stepped out onto the busy Seattle pavement. The afternoon sun was bright and warm, breaking through the typical gray clouds. I took a deep breath of the crisp city air. I raised my right hand to block the glare of the sun. The dull gray titanium ring caught the light, gleaming with a proud, silent brilliance. The empire behind me was burning to the ground, but my hands were finally clean. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. Please let me know in the comments where you are listening from. If you enjoyed this revenge tale and want to support our channel, please consider helping us with just $1 by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen, or by clicking the PayPal link in the description or the pinned comment. Your generous support provides the budget to pay our staff, helping them feed their families and allowing us to continue creating these exciting stories for you. Have a wonderful day.